My grandmother's house smelled like cinnamon and old wood, and for 31 years that smell meant safety to me. It doesn't anymore. I need to tell you what happened at Thanksgiving this year, because I've been sitting with it for weeks and I can't stop turning it over in my head. I keep thinking about the moment my aunt set those envelopes on the table. Thick cream-colored envelopes, the kind that cost $3 each at the stationery store, and the way she looked right past me when she handed them out. But I should start from the beginning, because the ending won't make sense without it. My name is Serena. I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed CPA, and for the last 4 years, I have been the sole financial manager for my family's catering business, a business my grandfather built from nothing in 1987, the same business my mother has poured her entire life into, the same business my cousin Elliot runs into the ground a little more each quarter while everyone applauds his vision. My grandfather passed 3 years ago. When he died, he left the business in a trust, split between my mother and her older sister, my Aunt Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann's contribution to the business, as far as I can tell, is showing up to the annual holiday party and telling everyone how good the food looks. My mother does the bookkeeping, the vendor negotiations, the staff scheduling. I do the taxes, the quarterly projections, the compliance filings. We have kept this business solvent through a pandemic, through 2 rounds of equipment failure, and through the year Elliot decided to rebrand without telling anyone and ordered $12,000 worth of embroidered napkins with the wrong logo on them. Elliot is 28. He has a business degree from a school I'd never heard of before he enrolled there. He has never filed a tax return in his life without calling me in a panic 3 days before the deadline. He also, apparently, is the future of this family. That's what Aunt Ruth Ann told everyone at Thanksgiving. The future of this family. I heard it from across the kitchen while I was slicing the sweet potato pie my mother had been up since 5 in the morning making. I heard it and I set the knife down and I took a breath and I thought, okay. I have heard versions of this my whole life. I know how to let it go. I didn't know what was coming next. We sat down to eat around 2 in the afternoon. My grandmother was at the head of the table, the way she always is. And she looked beautiful, 81 years old in a burgundy blouse, her hair freshly done, her hands folded in her lap. I love my grandmother so much, it physically hurts sometimes. She is the person I call when everything falls apart. She is the reason I learned to cook, the reason I stayed close to this family even when staying close cost me things I didn't realize I was losing. Dinner was fine. Dinner was good even. My cousin Deja made her cornbread, which is genuinely the best cornbread I've ever had, and for a little while we were just a family eating together. And I let myself relax. I let myself forget about the napkins and the quarterly loss Elliot still hasn't explained, and the fact that my bonus this year was 8% lower than it was last year, despite the fact that I personally saved us from a $40,000 penalty from the IRS by catching an error in our contractor classifications. I let myself forget all of it. And then Aunt Ruth Ann pushed back from the table and said she had an announcement. She stood up at the head of the table. Not her seat, my grandmother's seat. She walked to my grandmother's seat, and she held up a glass of sparkling cider, and she said that she wanted to honor the next generation of this family. She said that the holidays were a time to think about legacy. She said that her own father, my grandfather, God rest his soul, had always believed that some people were simply born with the instinct for leadership, and that you had to recognize it early and cultivate it. Then she reached into the tote bag she'd hung on the back of her chair, and she pulled out 5 envelopes. I counted the people at the table. 11 adults, 6 who were under 40. She gave one to Elliot. She gave one to Elliot's younger brother, my cousin Freddie, who is 22 and has never held a job longer than 4 months. She gave one to my second cousin Becca on Ruth Ann's side, who I have met maybe 4 times in my life. She gave one to Becca's husband, which I still don't fully understand. And she gave the last one to my Aunt Ruth Ann's goddaughter Portia, who is not even technically family, who flew in from Phoenix specifically for this. She did not give one to me. She did not give one to Deja. She did not give one to my mother, who has given more to this business than anyone alive. I sat very still. Elliot opened his envelope first, because Elliot always goes first. He pulled out a card and read it, and then he grinned that particular grin of his, the one that means he's about to say something that will irritate me. And he held it up so the table could see. It was a letter A formal letter, on business stationery, naming him as the incoming operations director of my family's catering company. Effective January 1st. No one had told me. No one had told my mother. The room got very loud. People were congratulating him, and Ruth Ann was smiling, and my grandmother was nodding slowly in the way she does when she's in a crowded room and doesn't want to make a scene. And I was sitting there with my fork still in my hand trying to understand what I had just witnessed. Deja caught my eye from across the table. She gave me a look that said, "I know. I see it too. I know." My mother was quiet. I know my mother's quiet. I've known it my whole life. And this was not the comfortable kind. This was the kind of quiet where she is deciding something. After the envelopes, after the congratulations, after Elliot made a small speech about innovation and vision that lasted 4.5 minutes, we moved into the living room for dessert. I got up to help clear the table. My hands were steady. I was very focused on keeping my hands steady. Roseanne found me in the kitchen. She said she hoped I understood that these decisions were about the long-term health of the business. She said she knew I had been doing wonderful work. Wonderful. She actually said that, like she was talking about a child's drawing. And that, of course, there would always be a place for me in a support capacity. She said that leadership required a certain kind of presence, a certain kind of vision, and that not everyone was built for it. And there was no shame in that. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said very calmly that I appreciated her letting me know. I went back to the living room. I sat next to my grandmother. I ate a piece of Deja's cornbread. I stayed for another hour and a half, because leaving early would have become the story, and I refused to become the story. But on the drive home, I called Deja. "I saw the financials last month," she said, before I'd gotten 10 words out. "Elliot's been pulling from the operating account. Did you know that?" "I didn't know that." "How much?" I said. She told me. I had to pull over. $11,000, withdrawn in increments small enough to avoid the automatic flags, over the course of 7 months. Not payroll. Not vendor payments. Not any category I could identify from the descriptions. Just gone. I sat in a parking lot outside a CVS in the dark, and I thought about my grandfather building this business with his own hands. I thought about my mother getting up before dawn to make sweet potato pie for people who had just announced her irrelevance over dinner. I thought about Ruth Ann saying the words support capacity, like they were a kindness. I got back in the car. I drove home. And I started working. I want to be clear about something. I am not a dramatic person. I don't like conflict. I spent years trying to be the reasonable one, the steady one, the person who keeps her head down and does good work and trusts that good work will eventually be noticed. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what I did next was not impulsive. It was not emotional. I thought about it for 9 days before I did anything at all. On the 9th day, I pulled every financial record I had access to and I built a report. A real one. Time-stamped. Sourced. Cross-referenced. Every withdrawal. Every discrepancy. Every quarter where the numbers Elliot reported to the family didn't match the numbers in the actual accounts. I had been doing the books long enough to know where to look. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop because it kept being worse than I thought. It wasn't just the $11,000. Over 18 months, there was close to $40,000 in irregular activity. Some of it might have been sloppy bookkeeping. Some of it was not. I am a CPA. I know the difference between a mistake and a pattern, and this was a pattern. I called an attorney. Not a family friend, not someone who had ever met my aunt or my cousin. A business attorney I found independently. Someone who had no connection to anyone. I sent her the report. She reviewed it and called me back within 24 hours. She said I had enough to trigger a formal audit under the terms of the trust. She also said that if I wanted to move first, I needed to do it before January 1st. Before Elliot's appointment became official, before he had the authority to start making changes to who had access to what, that gave me 11 days. I spent those 11 days being completely normal. I went to family events. I answered Elliot's texts about the transition timeline. I helped my mother with the corporate event we were catering on the 15th, a holiday party for a law firm downtown. And I stood in the kitchen of their office building at 8 in the evening making sure the past appetizers went out on time. and nobody looking at me would have known anything was different. The Monday before Christmas, I filed the audit request. My attorney submitted it on my behalf, through the trust administrator, a process that, it turns out, neither Ruthann nor Elliot had thought to think about, because it had never occurred to them that I would. I had been quiet and steady and competent for so long that they had simply stopped imagining I might do anything unexpected. The trust administrator was required to notify both beneficiaries, my mother and Aunt Ruthann, within 48 hours. I told my mother the night before the notification went out. I sat at her kitchen table with the report printed out and walked her through every page. She didn't say much. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I always thought something was off, but I didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was making trouble." I took her hand. I said, "You weren't making trouble. You were right." The notification went to Ruthann on a Wednesday morning. I know this because my cousin Freddie texted me 40 minutes later and said, and I'm quoting directly, "What did you do?" I put my phone face down on my desk and kept working. Elliot called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. His third message said that I was destroying the family over nothing, that this was jealousy, that my grandfather would be ashamed of me. I listened to it once and then I deleted it, because I knew that if I listened to it again I might let it get to me, and I had worked too hard to let it get to me now. My aunt showed up at my apartment that evening. I saw her car outside from my window. I watched her sit in it for almost 10 minutes before she got out. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he used to referee disagreements between my mother and Ruthann when they were young, always splitting the difference, always making peace. I thought about how much energy this family had spent over the years making peace rather than making things right. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked older than she had at Thanksgiving. Not physically. It was only 3 weeks, but in the way someone looks when they've been carrying something heavy since you last saw them. She said she needed me to understand that she had only been trying to protect the business. She said Elliot had potential that I wasn't seeing because I was too focused on the numbers. She said that family meant giving people chances to grow into who they were capable of becoming. I let her finish. Then I said, "The audit is not about Elliot's potential. The audit is about $40,000 that I cannot account for, and about my mother, who has given her life to this business, being handed a letter at the Thanksgiving table instead of a conversation." I said, "If there's an explanation for the money, the auditor will find it, and we will all be relieved. But I am not withdrawing the request. And I am not going to apologize for filing it." She left without saying goodbye. The audit took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of an outside firm, going through every record, every account, every transaction. 6 weeks of Elliot cycling through anger and silence, and 2 separate phone calls where he tried to explain that the withdrawals were loans he had intended to pay back, that he'd been dealing with personal debt, that it had never been his intention to take anything that wasn't eventually going to be his anyway. That last part, eventually going to be his anyway. I wrote it down when he said it because I wanted to make sure I remembered it exactly. The auditor's final report confirmed irregular withdrawals totaling $38,400 over 22 months. The trust administrator referred the matter to the board of the business, which consisted of my mother, Aunt Ruthann, and an independent director my grandfather had appointed before he died. The independent director, a retired businessman named Charles who had known my grandfather for 40 years, voted with my mother. Elliot's appointment as operations director was rescinded. The money was to be repaid, with interest, within 90 days, or legal action would follow. Ruthann called it a betrayal. I heard that from 3 separate family members, as if they had agreed on the word in advance. Betrayal. As if the thing I had betrayed was my obligation to stay quiet. Christmas this year was small. My mother, me, Deja, and Deja's boyfriend at my mother's house. We cooked all day and ate too much and watched old movies and didn't talk about any of it until late in the evening when we were cleaning up. And then my mother said very quietly that she had been scared for so long. Scared of rocking the boat. Scared of rocking the boat. Scared of being the one who caused problems. And she was sorry it had taken this long for someone to say out loud what she'd been too afraid to say. I told her she didn't need to apologize. She said, "I know, but I wanted to. I think about Ruthan's voice saying support capacity, and I think about the way those envelopes looked laid out on the table, and I think about Elliot's voicemail about my grandfather being ashamed. And then I think about my grandfather, who I knew well, who used to sit with me at this same table and tell me that the most important thing about numbers was that they didn't lie. Numbers, he said, don't care who you are or who your family thinks you are. They just tell you what happened. He was right. That's all I did. I followed the numbers and I let them tell the truth. Elliot has 31 days left to make the first payment. I'm not the one keeping track of that deadline. That's the trust administrator's job now, not mine. My job, as of January 1st, is officially operations director. My mother cried when she found out. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that doesn't have a clean name. That's somewhere between relief and grief. And something else I don't have a word for. I didn't cry until I was in the car on the way home. And then I did, for about 3 blocks. And then I stopped, and I drove the rest of the way in the quiet, and I let it be over. It's not really over. I know that. There will be more calls from cousins. There will be a version of this story circulating in the family where I'm the villain, where I've destroyed things, where I was never grateful enough for what I was given. I've already heard pieces of that version secondhand, and honestly, let them have it. People who need to believe that story will believe it regardless of what I say. But if you're listening to this, and you know what it feels like to be the one who does the work that nobody announces at the table, if you know what it feels like to be handed a polite smile and a title like support capacity while someone else gets the letter and the applause, I want you to know that I see you. And I want you to know that quiet doesn't mean powerless. It took me a long time to understand that. I'm still learning it, honestly. But I'm learning. I've thought a lot about why it took me so long, not the audit. I moved on that the moment I had enough. But the years before that, the years of watching Elliot get credit for work he didn't do, of hearing Aunt Ruthann use the word visionary about someone who couldn't read a balance sheet, of sitting quietly at family dinners while my mother refilled everyone's glasses and no one thought to thank her. I've thought about all those years and I keep coming back to the same thing. I confused keeping the peace with keeping my dignity. Those are not the same thing. I know that now. There's a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I hear the word betrayal from enough cousins and I start to believe it, where I decide that rocking the boat is worse than drowning slowly in a boat that was never meant to carry me. I almost lived that version. For a long time, I think I was living it. What changed wasn't the envelopes. It wasn't even Elliot's name on that letter. It was Deja's voice on the phone that night, and the number she said, and the way my hands went still on the steering wheel, because I realized that what I had been calling peace was actually just permission. I had been giving everyone permission to take more and more and more, because I kept showing up and absorbing it without a word. That's not loyalty. That's erosion. What I did wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it sounds from the outside. I filed a document. I followed a process. I did exactly what my grandfather's trust was designed for. The independent check, the outside review, the thing that exists precisely because families are human and humans make choices that need accountability. I didn't invent the consequence. I just stopped pretending I couldn't see what was happening. And here's what I've learned about that. The truth doesn't need your help to be true. It just needs someone willing to stop looking away. $38,000 didn't appear in that audit because I was angry. It appeared because it was always there, waiting for someone to look carefully enough. My grandfather used to say numbers don't lie. He was right. The only thing that had been lying was the silence. Ruthann called it a betrayal because in her version of the family, my role was to hold things up quietly and never ask what I was holding. Elliot called it jealousy because he genuinely could not conceive of a world where competence mattered more than confidence. They had both spent so long in a story where they were the protagonists that they couldn't recognize what was actually happening when someone simply told the truth. My mother cried when she found out about the directorship. I'm going to think about that for a long time, not the crying itself, but what was underneath it. 30 years of early mornings and vendor calls and holding this business together, and what broke her open wasn't the title. It was being seen. Finally, after all of it, being seen. That's the thing I want to carry forward. Not the win, not the audit, not watching Elliot's appointment disappear. It's the look on my mother's face, because she deserved that 30 years ago. And the fact that it took this long is not something I can undo, but it is something I can make sure never happens again. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. It took me my whole adult life to really believe that. But it's true, and if you're sitting somewhere right now feeling invisible, feeling like the work you do will never be the work that gets announced at the table, I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I'm going to tell you it's worth it. The moment you decide that what you know matters as much as what you're given permission to say, that's the moment everything starts to shift. It shifted for me on a Wednesday morning, in a parking lot outside a CVS, in the dark. Better late than never.